Welcome to all. Let's start. Om Shri Narayana Parame Guruve Namaha. Today we don't have the Deva Pashikam, but I am still honored to introduce again to you Father Dr. George Tadatil, SDB. Father is presently the principal of Salesian College in Sonada Siliguri in Darjeeling, which is affiliated to the North Bengal University. He completed his doctorate from the School of Religion and Philosophy, University of Madras, making a study on Sri Narayana Guru movement in Kerala. He was a junior fellow, Indian Council of Philosophical Research during the period 1998 to 2000, the head of the Department of Philosophy in the college where he works during 2000-2009. He has co-edited the work Communities and Identity Consciousness, South Indian Trajectories, a Madras University publication from 2004, which is based on his research on community transitions in the last century. Cultural Identity in Nepali Language and Literature, a Salesian College Sonada publication 2005, and edited Subaltern Perspectives, Philosophizing in Context in Asian Trading Corporation, Bangalore publication 2005. He is author of Vision from the Margin, a study of the Narayan Guru movement in the literature of Nitya Chaitanya Yati, which was published in 2007, and besides has co-edited Sahitya Academy publication Cultural Linguistic Transitions in the Nepali speech community of Darjeeling, and co-authored Tista on the Run. His latest publication is A Transformative Power of the One World Vision of Sri Narayana Guru in India and in Civilizational Futures, Backwaters Collective on Metaphysics and Politics 2, which was edited by Vinay Lal, which is Oxford University publication 2015. Father George, welcome back. We're very honored to have you and look forward to your lecture this evening. Over to you.
Thank you, Yumna. Thank you, Madam Jija, and thanks to all of you for your late night arrival on a kind of performance which is not a performance. And I guess it's just the love for and willingness to make efforts to understand that brings us all together. I will try not to be too long because of the timing. And I guess this kind of gathering is not only for intellectual stimulation, but it's a mode of acknowledging and celebrating and living through these times. And in living through what we are experiencing, we want to look at an exemplar, the way in which he lived and he confronted and he provided and continues to provide inspiration. At least for me, as I shared in my previous talk, and I will quickly from this point, instead of going forward, first go backward, both for reminiscing and for recalling the kind of argument or approach that I had presented, and come back to add another note or a dimension to how we can grow in our appreciation for, reverence towards, and obeisance to the person around whom, because of whom we are in this gathering. So let me present to you what triggered in my mind or my thinking for creating this by reading out to you something that has come out from the latest book that just released called The New Despotism, Dark Times Again, a 2020 publication. The author says, Western democracy is already showing signs of decay. This should put on guard those developing countries still searching for a path to building a political system. This is a quotation from a Chinese scholar called Su Changyi in this book. And he goes on to say, we must pull apart the language of Western democracy to have a truly free spirit and an independent national character. We must first take the idea of democracy promoted by a minority of Western countries and demote it from universal to local. This is just one representative, prominent voice talking from China about the changes that are taking place in the US and in the Europe. And across the world, what we are witnessing is not greater appreciation for what everyone thought would be the future, the end of history, so to say, when, nearly 70% of the countries were officially democratic nations. I'm making this reference to say there is something not all okay. There's something going haywire. Something is not fully in our control. Something is slipping from our grasp. What is replacing it? And this is my second quotation that made me to arrive at from where we are beginning. The book is titled Despotism. Now, a definition of that: a new type of pseudo-democratic government led by rulers skilled in the arts of manipulating and meddling with the people's lives, marshalling their support and winning their conformity. Despotisms craft top to bottom relations of dependency oiled by wealth, money, law, elections, and much media talk of defending the people and the nation against domestic subversives and foreign enemies. Despotisms are top-down pyramids of power that defy.
Let me put it in a very in a shorter way. The basic point that I wanted to share with you. So on one side, here we are because we are connected with, associated with the personality and the personage of Sri Narayana Guru. And I've been trying in my previous presentation to say where is his relevance and how do we see from very social science point of view. One could go from a religious point of view, faith point of view, belief point of view, and there is no two-way about how one feels about another person when one goes with that eye of faith. Now, when we go looking at what individuals who have traversed this human terrain in the social world and what they have contributed and what has happened to society as a result of their intervention, and then we need an angle of vision. How are we looking at that intervention of an individual? The event that a person was in a historical context. This is what I've been trying to say, that in my approach to the study of Sri Narayana Guru, I've been looking at him and his contribution and his writings and his impact on other persons and the entire society and the transformation that it went through in Kerala, and how that transition has got something for the rest of the world to learn from. And if there is a truth in that, what is the kind of impact that he made at that time, and what's the kind of impact that he is making today. Let me say this in different ways. We know what happened, let's say, during the time of Shankaracharya, that is 8th, 9th centuries. He was in Kerala for sure, historical birthplace and documented. But we also know that he has his impact and influence in Badrinath. And if you go to a place not far away from where I am in Kathmandu, you will be surprised to find the kind of worship system that goes and has connections with Kerala. Or you go to Kashi. So there was a time in which something that originated in the Kerala coast having had a trans-Indian, pan-Indian impact. Similarly, today what is happening in this lecture that we are holding, here I am sitting on the foothills of the Himalayas, and there you are in the rest of the world. And what we are seeing is what Narayana Guru did in his time and in his days in Kerala is having its ripple effect. So then I started by saying, what is unique about today's situation? So all political analysts are trying to say, is not only of India, but across the world, democracy is taking a beating. The kind of belief with which last 80 years, the generation that is listening to me, we had a kind of concept of something modern being created. You know, the liberal kind of living, the democratic space. Now, this is shrinking, and these institutions of democracy are being, attacked and are being thrown down and are being, decimated, defamed. And in that sense, across the world, there is a rise of an alternative kind of, let's say, arrangement of political arrangement and social space. Now, if that is happening, something similar happened at the time of Narayana Guru is my next point. Because then too, there was a kind of dominant space, and there was a space where some were struggling to occupy, struggling to be heard, struggling to make their presence felt. In that kind of a divisive situation, how did Narayana Guru intervene? So this is the reason behind my titling my second part of my talk as Sri Narayana Guru, the mediator. Now let me come to say one or two concrete ways in which we can see this mediation role. And for this again, let me go back to what those of you, if you listened to me last time, I was trying to say that where do we place Narayana Guru vis-a-vis other great persons of his own time? For example, Mahatma Gandhi or B.R. Ambedkar. So we looked at how on that one issue of what's the kind of religious choice one should have, what's the kind of option that one has with regard to the religion one will follow, the stand that Gandhi took and the stand that Ambedkar took. Of one saying that how could you ever think of changing your religious affiliation, because that is the most inherent aspect of what you are and that you have imbibed and that you have inherited. So you can't think of changing it. That is Gandhian position. And on the other side, you have Ambedkar saying that if there is anything that defines you categorically, that is your position and your possibility to make a choice as fundamental as what will be your belief, what will be your faith. So choice of faith is that which defines you and your right and your persona. Now with these two opposing stands, come back to Narayana Guru. What is he saying with regard to religious choices? And these were hard choices around his time, at that time too. Some wanting to go to Sikhism, some wanting to go to Islam, some wanting to go to Christianity, some wanting to remain in Hindu kind of, redefinition. But he says, I am none of these. So in a way, he's not denying the value of faith. He's not denying religion, but he's asking all of us and asking all his contemporaries, what is religion meant to do? And this is, again, we are back today asking the same question. Whether it is religion A, B, or C, or D, what is religion meant to do? And here, Narayana Guru offers a critique. He offers a mediation in terms of each individual who wants to practice a faith, live a faith, being challenged to find out what is it that I truly believe. What is the kind of humanity? In that sense, Oru Jati Madam, Oru Jati Oru Madam, Oru Devam Manushana. You know, his core principle of self-definition is something that challenges all existing. So in that sense, it's a kind of wedge that comes through to, on the one side, to reconcile opposites, and on the other side, to make a new pathway where there is dead end and where there is a kind of conflict. This is one example. I thought one could elaborate on this. Secondly, when we say that Narayana Guru is a modern mediator, let us look at two other figures who are revered. Here I am in Bengal, and here if you come to Bengal, and if you do not know something about Rabindranath Tagore, then you are not a public person. And that's precisely what is happening. Like recently, you heard how one political aspiring to make a entry into Bengal, making a wrong assertion with regard to where he was born, and that becoming a little bit of a joke within the local language and media and things like that. So, I mean, just to say that Rabindranath Tagore is a revered father figure. He is an embodiment of a cosmopolitan attitude that the Bengal Renaissance, the culture that first in a way encountered seriously the Western modernity as it came, whether it was in the shape of 1757, the Battle of Plassey, and the beginning of the entire modern, etc. So, and then you have another great person here, that is Vivekananda. So on the one side you have Tagore's cosmopolitanism, and you have Vivekananda's nationalism. Between these two positions, where would we place Narayana Guru? Was he a nationalist? Was he not a nationalist? Was he a kind of universal figure or cosmopolitan, or was he not a cosmopolitan? So you are trying to get a feel of what I mean to say, that in today's context, the promotion of Narayana Guru, or the acceptance of Narayana Guru, is something that is vital to the preservation of the cultural sense of what India is, what India was, and what India is meant to be. So in this sense, the role of Narayana Guru's ideology, vision, his self-understanding, and the movement that he triggered is highly significant. And here, again, in order to understand the kind of mediation that Narayana Guru movement, when I say the Narayana Guru movement, I'm referring to the Sri Narayana Guru, the Nadaraja Guru is his immediate disciple, and Nitya Chaitanya is a disciple of a disciple, and Muni Narayana Prasad, and the Narayana Gurukula Foundation, which was the focal point of my study in the whole corpus of the Narayana Guru movement. So now, if this movement were to be placed vis-a-vis what happened in Bengal Renaissance with the Brahmo Samaj, and what happened with the Adi Samaj or the Prarthana Samaj on the other side of the India, so then again we begin to see how unique and how distinctly positioned the kind of worldview of Narayana Guru. Madam Edayalu mentioned Narayana. So this kind of a critique saying that what is it that makes human person better? What kind of social order is going to promote the human person and the welfare of the individual and the collective person? So here I'm just throwing a few snippets to show that the intervention that Narayana Guru made is having an impact and is going to define the new India into which we are entering. Let me come to my last point of emphasizing this aspect by saying that, you know, in the present context, at least in the intellectual circle that I am following, there is this sense that you know, there is no serious engagement in academic circles with religion. Now, this is coming from a kind of feeling that when our modern Indian framework was set up, and the emphasis on containing or equidistancing from the religious factor in society, the so-called secularism, prevented a serious engagement with religion as a defining factor in society. Then came the entire leftist thinking ideologues or the critical players in the formation of the nation state. And they too seriously never engaged with the role that religion had, saying, you know, going by the rule book of Marxian understanding, that religion is an opium of the people, it is false consciousness, and therefore it should be pure rationality that should define how life in public sphere is organized. So this negation of seriously engaging with religion created a vacuum into which the religious aspirations, and therefore you find an overtly religiously defined and defining kind of politics surfacing today. On the one side, an ultra impact and influence of the neoliberalism and capitalism, which today some would say to the extent of called as surveillance capitalism, where every click that you make on your mobile or on the computer is being stored. And that data is the new oil of the big money that is controlling the entire world and the cybersecurity, and all our lives are going to be controlled. And it's already happening. So these forces, on the one side, are kind of, you know, overt and extra right-wing kind of religious aspirations across the board. In all over the world, we find this happening. And the play of wealth being restricted into fewer hands, having its aim and its kind of impact and dominance, and the decimation of vast majority. And the projected number of poor people in the world is 2 billion. So it is not reducing, but it is increasing. So with all the progress that we are making. So in these kind of times, there is a person in Narayana Guru who is talking a different language to those who want an order based on religion, asking them to rethink what exactly is religion. Those who want to put the human dimension first, the Anthropocene as we are talking about, on the forefront, being asking, where does the human being stand? The Anugamba Dashaka. Where is your kindness restricted only to the human, or should our kindness be dispersed to all beings? So this and much more that we already know from Darshanamala and from Atmavadesha Shadagam, or any text that you take of Narayana Guru, is challenging us to say, are we living our lives authentically, and could we make our life more authentic? And if we do, then probably the world is going to be different. I would like to stop here, my friends. You have been very patient, and I once again apologize for having, not been able to present the PPT, which is there, but I can share with you. But I'm just trying to say a very simple point that we have a great treasure and a legacy, and we have a responsibility to spread this message of Narayana Guru. Here I am in my little way. I take pride in a way of saying that I'm doing what I can. There's no one else who has translated Narayana Guru's life story into Nepali language. And we have a number of series of seminars in our own college and in the intellectual circles of this Bengali, Hindi, Nepali language framework of Darjeeling. And I just came out from another conference where we are looking at the religious practices of the Eastern Himalayas, with professors from Hong Kong, from Yadavpur University, from Northeastern Hill University, from Assam Silchar University. We are trying to see how in this part of the world, when we say there is religion among the ordinary people, what kind of religiosity is it? What kind of spirituality is it? You have the Tibetan monks doing the monastic meditations. You have the Catholic nuns and the priests doing their Christian meditation. You have the Ansman Islamia, and so this conflation of the religious terrain in the mountain space as something that crosses and preserves a kind of harmony that is unique, and how an academic institution and research community has a responsibility to look into closer dimensions of what are the textures and how do we go about researching it and making it known, to say that what Narayana Guru spoke about in South India is also not only unique to Kerala, which some people there think that nobody other than a Malayali can understand Narayana Guru, and I've heard others saying that so. But you will find, and I know, weekly talk just like you all are doing, happening in Portland, happening in Bainbridge. Like-minded people coming, reading the text, making their reflections, and typing it out and dispersing into a group of persons. So there is across the world something happening. You are doing in your own way through these conferences to keep alive something that is very precious. I want to congratulate you all. Thank you for inviting me for a second time, and with apologies, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Father. It was really, time was short, but it was very crisp and very insight. And as you said, yes, each one of us start contributing our small bit of pieces, this message can just go around. So now, as we have another 10 more minutes, we can open it up for discussion. So anyone from the forum would like to have a question, would like to have a discussion on this aspect, what Father has shared now, please, it's open up for discussion.
Good evening, Father. I am Dilip here from Cochin. This is the second time I am listening to you, and we are all thankful to you for putting forward an academic perspective of Guru, and especially you spend long years in research about Guru and bringing out this kind of perspectives. That is really wonderful, and we really appreciate your efforts, and we all should support such efforts. And the one thing is, Guru said about religions in Atmopadesh Shadakam, Palamada Saravu Megamennu Para Thulathiluranailantananna Pole Palavida Yukti Paranyu Pamaranmar Alavadu Kandale Adamarnidenam. So it is very, very clear, like the people who look at the religions like an elephant, and they make comments by seeing only one perspective. So the same thing is happening about Guru also. When academicians approach Guru, they will see only an academic perspective. When politicians approach Guru, they will see only his social reform moments. When the real sannyasis or the the people who live in ashrams, they will see only the philosophical side of Guru. Institutions like Narayana Gurukula will see only the Jnana Sarani of Guru, what he has written in his books. So again, we are missing a holistic perspective. Similarly, your topic here today, Guru as a mediator. First of all, I disagree with that title, because Guru is an Advaita Vedanti. And Advaita Vedanti, if Guru want to become a mediator, then Guru should accept there are two. For a mediation, you need more than one. So in the history also, we have not seen Guru mediating between anything. So even his social interventions also, we could not see him as a mediator. And Guru's perspective on this thing is very clearly mentioned in the interview done by Mr. C.V. Kunyiraman. So Kunyiraman asked a lot of critical questions about the Guru's most proclaimed message, Oru Jadi, Oru Madam, Oru Deivam. So Kunyiraman accept Oru Jadi, you yourself have scientifically explained in the Jadi Nirnayam and Jadi Lakshanam. Then Oru Deivam also we can understand. But in Oru Madam, how we can accept this Oru Madam? Then there is a long conversation happening between them. So there also, there is not even an inch of scope to see Guru as a mediator. So that is one area.
Dilip, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let us take with your own premise that of Guru as an Advaitin, and that's what my book Vision from the Margin is also establishing. Though T. Bhaskaran would take an opinion that Guru was not an Advaitin, but an Advaitin, going from the Shaiva Siddhanta and the Shaivism impact that he had. If you look at the Narayana Guru Vaigari and all the collections that T. Bhaskaran has collected. So, but let's go with what Narayana Guru also interprets Narayana Guru as a Advaitin. Now, my philosophical position is that when you say somebody is an Advaitin, somebody is not two. Advaita is not monism. Not even Shankara's Advaita is monism. So between qualified monism or Advaita of Ramanuja, Shankaracharya and Madhava, what is unique is this ability to hold the differences of the two as not two, which is not equating the two to a mere simplistic one, because then it would be enough to say reality is one, Egam. Egatvam, instead of saying Advaita. So there is that in the very word Advaitin and Advaita, there is an element of philosophical mediation, and that is the kind of mediation between God and man, for example, world and the human being. So any philosopher will tell you that a philosophical understanding of the reality, which as you yourself said should be holistic and comprehensive, and in trying to get a comprehensive view, one cannot be partial. So any dualistic view is partial, I agree with you. And a non-dualistic view is a view that allows for mediation, and therefore my title is not that he was only I gave only examples from the political field or from cultural field, but I could also give you equal amount of arguments to show that in a philosophical, theological sense, for example, theologically, we say Christ is a mediator. Means what? With the human suffering is mediated, and one is able to overcome the sinfulness and become divine. So this mediation is what any priest in whichever religion you take, the role of the priest is to be a mediator between the human inadequacy and the divine healing or the divine fulfillment. So it is in those sense bit more complex than a mere simplistic or ordinary understanding of somebody. There's a fight and you are going and trying to mediate. No, please don't misunderstand me. using the word of Narayana Guru as a mediator only in that political or social sense, but it has got a deeper repercussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Anyway, it is a debatable subject, but this is not the forum. So thank you.
Thank you, Dilip sir. Anybody else would like to? Okay, if not, then we'll go to Jija Madam. Madam, we'd like to hear from you. And with that, we'll get into the close. We are just at almost at the end of the session.
Yeah, thank you, Venu. It really was another perspective, Father George. When I saw the title, I also had reservations, as Dilip had expressed. But yes, since I'm not so well versed with Guru's philosophy yet, I just listened with great interest and curiosity your perspective, and I would like to contemplate on it further before I would like to comment upon it. And the question which arose in my mind, you have already answered. And I would like to thank you and congratulate you for the work that you're doing in near Far East, in the north, almost northeast. It is not, Darjeeling is really in West Bengal, but it is very close to the northeastern region. And I was very curious to know, how did you get interested in translating and doing work in Nepali language, because of the preponderance of Nepalis in the area that you are, or why not take Bengali as the language for propagating?
Okay,
Translating.
thank you, madam. That's a very, very, very practical, pragmatic, just a clarification. In West Bengal, in the northern part, which is the Himalayan district, now there are two districts called Kalimpong and Darjeeling, which was earlier one. These were adjacent to, one side is Nepal, the other side is Bhutan. So these hill tracts, when the British came and started the tea gardens, they needed labor. So in these hill mountains, they brought from labor from Nepal. So that's why the vast majority of the hill population, also because of climatic conditions, they are adjusted easier. So they all met.
Thank you, Jija Madam. And thank you once again. Thank you very much, Father George, for joining with us for the second time. And definitely, yes, we will be looking forward to hear from you again. And at this point, I'd like to, on behalf of Guru Anugram, I'd like to give across season's greetings for a wonderful year ahead, and Merry Christmas to each and every one of you who are here on behalf of Guru Anugram.